Hi everyone, Loki of Asgard here with Rhyme Signatures, the nerdiest music review this side of being largely responsible for bringing this band's name into common parlance. And today we're going to be doing a review of the new TesseracT album, War of Being. The time period is the early 2010s. The world is more innocent, the progressive metal scene is less crowded, and the staccato palm-muted chugging of the djent movement is in its infancy, as more and more bands are jumping onto the scene in an attempt to bring melodic harmony to the brutality of Meshuggah with alarming regularity. Truly, it was feeling like every other band that started up in this era was a self-described djent band, all looking to capitalise on what was becoming extraordinarily popular with the younger crowd of metal at the time. The 80s had thrash, the 90s had grunge, the 2000s was new, and it looked like the 2010s was set to become the djents. And at the top of this very stacked pile were two bands, that of Periphery and that of TesseracT, both managing to gather extremely rabid fan bases in an extremely short space of time. I distinctly remember going to see the Devin Townsend project back in the day, which had Periphery as the first support band, and I'd never seen a crowd more amped up and excited for a support act over the main course in my life. In truth, I'd never really gotten swept up in the craze of djent. After all, it just felt to me, at least, like a scene kid version of Meshuggah, all the guitars and none of the bite, with each band sounding more and more like a parody of whatever flavour of the month had come before them. But of the big two of Periphery and TesseracT, I always preferred the latter. TesseracT always came across as the more stoic, more grounded and technical of the bands compared to the frat bro meme lord that was Periphery. My appreciation of TesseracT went beyond their landmark debut of One, as when Altered State, their perceived by some to be difficult second album, was to my ears a near-perfect record, which was by and large helped by their new vocalist at the time, Ash O'Hara, whose soaring falsettos and extraordinary upper register really helped the band to stand out amidst a sea of others employing typically metalcore-esque angry vocals. However, Ash was only ever to last the one album, as previous vocalist Dan Tompkins came back into the fold with their third album Polaris, and has remained at the front ever since. In truth, I was always slightly bitter about this, as I'd always personally felt that Ash's vocal style fit the band better than Dan's did, but over the course of both Polaris and follow-up Sonder, I warmed up to him rapidly and began to appreciate that he was ultimately the perfect fit for the band, and resigned myself to the fact that Altered State would forever be that quirky second album that people either loved or hated, as it is often seen as not being a true representation of the band's proper identity. In all honesty though, I found both Polaris and Sonder to be remarkably mid-albums, certainly when compared to the landmark status of One and the unique and fascinating style of Altered State. They just felt like the band was, treading water a little, not being entirely certain of what exactly they wanted to really achieve with the band. And while I gave these records their dues when they came out, I never really felt any kind of, overwhelming desire to revisit them in any capacity. So along comes War of Being, a full 5 years since Sonder came out, and I'd honestly begun to wonder if the band had called it quits, and simply allowed Periphery to be the dominant force in this particular flavour of progressive metal. But no. In the same year that we've had Djent is not a genre, we've also been blessed with War of Being. And suddenly it feels like the soda wars of the 90s all over again, Are you Team Pepsi or are you Team Coke? In this instance, I am, just as I have always been, Team TesseracT, as War of Being demonstrates that not only can djent be alive and well in the year of our Lord 2023, it can have evolved to become so much more than its dubious Meshuggah-inspired origins suggested it ever could have been. War of Being is a triumphant return for TesseracT, and exactly the kind of album that I wish djent is not a genre could have been. War of Being feels like this is TesseracT at their most complete, at the most confident, and finally at the most satisfying level that they've ever been in their careers. They've taken the riff-centric instrumentation of One, the atmospherics and dreamlike nature of Altered State, and fused the best parts of Ash's falsetto with the hardest edges of Dan's growls into one superlative get yourself a man who can do it all record that everyone involved with should feel immensely proud of. What I personally enjoy the most about this release is it has a great throwback to the heaviness and intensity of their original material found on One, Album opener Natural Disaster wastes no time in thrusting the listener back to a time of thundering riffs and neck-snapping rhythms, and for as much as my preference for the more atmospheric altered state still rules my personal roost, hearing the band giving us a throwback to their heavier roots is immensely satisfying here, and this song does a wonderful job of setting the expectations for the hour's worth of music that we're being treated to. It's this increased length as well that I appreciate, with Sonder barely scraping past 35 minutes and Polaris at 46 or so. It's nice to get a truly weighty feeling release again, as War of Being is the longest album in the band's catalogue to date, and it feels like they've truly lent heavily into this, with each song and offering here going through a considerable sonic journey, managing to break away from the kind of monotony and repetition that the djent genre became so affected by. Even on the opening track, for all of its bombast and headbanging qualities, TesseracT aren't afraid to step on the brakes a little to allow melody and atmosphere to take top billing at around the midway point before the glacier-sized crushing riffs come sweeping back towards the ends to absolutely annihilate the listener. The biggest compliment I think I can dish out to War of Being is just how consistent the overall experience feels. There's an unmistakable style and through line across the entire record, sure, but every track feels like it manages to maintain its own identity and pattern during the experience, but also succeeds in feeling like an individual puzzle piece in the overall scope of the end product. Feeling like, each track is a small suite and part of a larger design. The album truly picks up the pace and has me in a vice-like grip by the time the third track, The Grey, kicks in. The first two songs here are excellent, make no mistake, but they do suffer a tiny little bit from feeling like the band is still, winding up the clock before allowing it to spin freely. The riffs are monstrous on War of Being, feeling like the band has learnt so much from every album that they've previously put out, but it also feels so fresh, like they've been really, taking their time with this one, and they wanted to create the best possible material before releasing this one into the wild. Now, I just really want to take a minute to talk about Dan Tompkins. Now, I've always enjoyed his vocals, but I, genuinely always kind of felt he was more of a, jack of all trades across his implementation of both harsh and clean vocals. His growls were never quite being as strong as Spencer's from Periphery, and his cleans, obviously, for me, being second fiddle to Ash O'Hara's. On War of Being, though, Dan has established himself as one of the strongest vocalists in modern progressive metal, handling both the light and shade with a deft fluency and effortless transition between the two. You need only listen to fourth track, Legion, for a perfect demonstration as to how exemplary his range has become. I was left gobsmacked by how delicately he cut through the air with some of the most accomplished falsettos I've ever heard in metal, and with just how easily he was able to ascend into that upper register without any kind of, angular transition or awkward brute forcing with his voice. This excellence is carried across the entire album, with every single song feeling like Dan's personal mission to announce to the world that this is the record he's been training his entire life for. And it is such a satisfying payoff to hear him sound as utterly dominating as he does here. I liked Dan before this album, but I would now comfortably put him in my top 5 favourite vocalists of all time after this performance on War of Being. But the rest of the band is hardly slouching behind him. Jay Pastone's drumming is reliable and intricate as ever, with some truly remarkable fills to be found across the album. Amos Williams' bass is thick, juicy, and rumbles underneath like a damned earthquake at times, and the twin guitars of Ackley Carney and James Monteith continue to offer up their usual trading of atmosphere-laden delicate moments, as well as face-crushing down-tuned stompers, as is befitting of the genre. Honestly, what's remarkable to me about TesseracT is how consistent their overall lineup has been since around 2005, as despite the admittedly revolving door policy that seemed to be affecting their earliest days and keeping a vocalist around for longer than 5 minutes. The band has technically had 7 vocalists over the course of their career, even if they've only ever had 2 across their studio releases. The main instrumental structure of the band has been largely untouched and unchanged now for near enough 20 years, and I feel this is reflected strongly in the musicianship of this record. You can really feel the bonds of friendship and familiarity of their playing together across it all. The playing is tight, fluid and natural feeling, with a sense that everyone's got their own story to tell, but they all respect each other's time and ability, which ends up creating music that's textured in such a way as to feel so effortlessly organic and enthralling. There's a real maturity and sense of growth in every song on War of Being, showcasing a band who've grown so much together over the life of themselves to finally reach a point where everyone feels like they've ascended to their respective final forms. In honesty, it's hard for me to pick holes in this record. The entire experience feels so rewarding and engaging from start to finish that my criticisms are largely petty and inconsequential in the long run. I don't know, perhaps there's maybe one too many atmospheric outros here and there, leading to some slightly unnecessary padding of the runtime. And, despite the evolutions and advances made to this kind of music since its explosion onto the scene in the 2010s, this is still unlikely to convince anyone on the fence about this sort of music that 2020's djent is worth their time. This is still ultimately a TesseracT album, and while War of Being feels like the perfection and absolute refinement of their sound, if you weren't convinced before, I still can't see this one being the one to change your mind and bring you on board. So what else can I say about TesseracT's War of Being? I'm not going to lie to you, I went into this one with caution, as I found both Sonder and Polaris to be distinctly underwhelming albums, and I'd almost been ready to dismiss TesseracT as a product of their time, and being, one of those bands who'd be in the prog metal history books as a textbook example of what djent was, and nothing more. But, against all odds, I feel that the band has exploded into relevancy once again, managing to make this particular type of music not only interesting again, but exciting as well. War of Being is a dense, textured, rewarding and engaging album that has captured my imagination in ways that I could have only dreamed of 5 years ago. Dan Tompkins has risen like a phoenix and held me in his Siren Song as one of the most accomplished and interesting vocalists in the genre, managing to make me finally forgive the band for departing from Ash O'Hara. I feel this is a record I'll be diving back into time and time again for years to come. The intensity and complexity of the instrumentation and structuring of the album is near overwhelming at times, but it is so well tempered with both melody and atmospherics that it becomes endlessly gratifying at an immediate level, that it's almost impossible not to fall in love with this record instantly. Big surprise then, my recommendation here is to pick this one up in physical format. TesseracT have quite frankly made the finest album of their career with War of Being, and I am incredibly excited to see where the band's ambitions will take them into their futures. This, guys, is all of course my opinion, as you know, so if you have listened to this record, please tell me what you thought about it in the comments down below. If you did like this video, please do share it around with anyone else who you think would possibly enjoy it, and please do consider subscribing to the channel for more content. I'm going to be leaving my link tree down below, where you will find all of the places to find me on social media, as well as a link to my Ko-fi page if you're feeling particularly generous and want to help support the channel. But until next time, guys, as always, keep your rhyme signatures extremely odd.